Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Landrum. I'm the president and CEO of the Alexandria Economic Development Partnership, and we are happy to have you all with us today to talk through new guidelines for phase 2 of the Virginia Forward Recovery Plan. Today's session is focused on restaurant and beverage businesses, so hopefully you are here for the right reason. Today's agenda, we will be going through who is here to answer questions from you, who is here as a panelist. We'll go through an overview of the general guidelines from the governor. We'll talk to you about how to reference your certificate of occupancy because many of the guidelines reference that as a standard for you in terms of how many guests you can welcome into your business. We'll talk again through the temporary program for restaurant outdoor dining areas. We talked with you all last time about this, but that program has been evolving. The health department is here to answer a lot of your technical questions, but also to remind you about the ALX Promise project and consultations available. And then we'll end with questions and answers and any ideas or suggestions you might have as you continue to reopen and identify things that we as a city could be doing to better help you safely reopen. I'll remind you that we have a chat and a Q&A function on this webinar, so please feel free to use either one of those to submit questions. Today's experts that you have available are myself and Carl Moritz, with the director of, who is the director of the Department of Planning and Zoning. He and I have been leading. Carl, he and I have been leading a series of meetings and discussions with tons and tons of city staff to talk through the reopening plans, not only for businesses, but for the city's public spaces. So we're happy to be hosting this session again today. We have Rachel Stradling with the Alexandria Health Department, Greg Fields, who's the director of our code department, who will be able to talk to you about your occupancy. Ann Horowitz, who has been, many of you might have been interfacing with if you have been pursuing outdoor dining. She has been doing an amazing job helping facilitate those applications. And Katie North, who is with the Department of Transportation and Environmental Services, who can answer questions about parking, loading, curbside pickup, etc. So we'll get started here today. I think as most people know, the Commonwealth is using phases to safely reopen the state. And so for the first 2 months, we were in phase 0. Right now, we are at the end of what is called phase 1, which is safer at home. That began Friday, May 29th, and is anticipated to end Thursday night. We heard yesterday from the governor that phase 2 for Northern Virginia will start on Friday. There is no set in stone length of time for these phases, but in previous presentations, they have said that those phases are likely to last 2 to 4 weeks or longer. Movement between the phases is based on meeting different health metrics that have been identified by the health department. And so that includes positivity test rates, availability of hospitals, availability of equipment, et cetera. So in many ways, these are moving targets. And so it's difficult to anticipate just how long these phases will last. Phase 3 is what we are all targeting for, to get to later this summer. There have been no guidelines yet published for that phase, so we won't be able to answer any questions you might have about that because the answers don't exist yet. So today we're really going to focus then on phase 2 and what that means for your food and beverage businesses. We're going to send this presentation around, and so we will include in it the phase 1 guidelines, but again, those are really just relevant for the next couple of days prior to our entry into phase 2. So new for phase 2 for restaurants and beverage businesses is that you will be able to welcome guests into your physical location. The occupancy or the number of guests that you will be able to welcome into your location is based on your certificate of occupancy, which is hopefully something that you all are familiar with. So it's 50% of that load while still being able to maintain a 6 feet physical distance between all individuals. So you need to be thinking through how you seat people within your restaurants, probably very differently than you have in the past. This will be dictated by the type of furniture you have. Obviously, if you have fixed furniture, there will be some challenges. You can't move it, and so you'll have to potentially eliminate every other station. If you have movable furniture, then you need to be conscious of this 6 foot physical distancing. The overall occupancy, while it is dictated by your certificate of occupancy, it cannot exceed 50. So the guidelines for phase 2 that came from the governor are specific to this industry. That's what we're talking about here today. But in general, there cannot be a social gathering. So that's people going out to a restaurant or a wedding or anything in between. There cannot be more than 50 people together in one space. So depending on the size of your restaurant, if you have a really large facility, the 50% of your occupancy might actually be much larger than 50 people, but know that 50 people is the absolute ceiling for phase 2. Another change for this phase 2 is the use of your bar and congregating areas. You are able to use seating in that area. It just can't be the seats that are up against your bar. So if you have high top tables, you are able to use those as long as you can space them out appropriately. Patrons may also wait for takeout or in your seated kind of area in the lobby, but they also then must maintain that 6 feet of physical distance between parties. So carried over from phase 1 are a number of other guidelines that we can walk through. The general message from the governor is really strongly encouraging you all to continue to offer takeout and delivery. You must maintain physical distancing from areas outside of the facility's control, so like public sidewalks. So for those of you who are offering outdoor dining, you must maintain this distance amongst tables, but you also need to think about what's around you. You cannot seat multiple parties at any one table. So if you have long communal tables, that's something I think that you really need to think about marking for a 6-foot division. At this point, game areas, dance floors, and playgrounds must all remain closed. You are allowed to have live musicians if they can remain at least 6 feet away from patrons and staff. And if that's allowed, I guess, in your approvals from the city of Alexandria. You are required to provide single-use disposable menus for every patron, so no recycling or passing along those sorts of materials between different parties. All of your employees who are working, so waiters and host staff, et cetera, are required to wear face coverings. Prior to each shift, you should be asking your employees to self-measure their temperature and assess their symptoms and potential exposure. You, like I think in the previous phases, you were supposed to remove all of the condiments from the table and only dispense them to a customer if they ask upon their request. You must be thoroughly cleaning and disinfecting all surfaces that are constantly being kind of touched. So think through your point of sale service, your tabletops, bathroom services, any sort of common areas. And then any tabletops and credit cards that or bill folders that you provide to your customers have to be disinfected between each set of patrons. So we're going to be sending this out. If you have not reviewed this information, it's relatively detailed. And again, if you have questions about any of this, we have the right experts on the phone to be able to answer. So next up, I'm going to turn it over to Greg Fields to talk to you about your certificate of occupancy.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you. I just want to talk to you about the certificate of occupancy because that is the calculation that the governor has said that you would use to determine your 50% occupancy or your maximum of 50. So when you opened your business, you should have received a certificate of occupancy permit and a certificate of occupancy that you would post in your establishment. Most of you are aware that the fire marshal's office performs annual or biannual inspections depending on the business. And one of the things they look at is that certificate of occupancy that's posted within the business. So that would be the occupancy number that you would use to make this calculation. However, if for some reason you have not received a certificate of occupancy or do not know where to find that number, we want to make sure we can help you with that. Henry Hollander is our small business facilitator, and you see his email here on the slide. He's happy to look that up for you and walk you through that if for some reason you have an issue. Now, your certificate of occupancy may not look exactly like what you see on this slide. They do depend on when you had it issued. It might look a little bit different. But There's also discussion within the directive about a minimum occupancy. Um, there are some jurisdictions in Virginia who post both a minimum and maximum occupancy. We may have some of those in the city, but for the most part, we generally only post maximum occupancies to avoid confusion. But again, if you have any questions about that or don't understand it, we're happy to help you, and you can contact Mr. Hollander on that. And I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end if you have any questions related to occupancy.
Great. Carl, you're up next.
Great. We've been, we initiated a program to make it easier to use outdoor dining. We anticipate that even with the move to phase 2, you and other restaurateurs are going to be depending on outdoor dining. The program expands the use, the availability of adjacent sidewalks and parking spaces for you to use for outdoor dining. Ann Horowitz, as Stephanie Landrum mentioned, is managing that program. Currently we've had about, I think, 50 applications. We're doing, turning them around as quickly as possible. Just generally speaking, you have access to the sidewalks right in front of your business, as well as the street side parking spaces. There are some, they have to be reviewed for safety, however. So for example, some folks who have restaurants right on a street corner, where cars might be turning the corner, we're going to be reviewing those to make sure that it's safe to do so. So not everybody may get the same answer based on safety questions. And Katie North is here to answer your questions about specific ones. Let's see, you are also able to use your parking lots. Right now we're not enforcing parking requirements for businesses. And I apologize, I did go a little bit fast and did the next slide a little bit, but maybe I'll just wait. Go ahead and go to the next slide then for that. In your application, we are asking for some information to help us evaluate whether or not it's safe to use the on-street parking spaces. So we are asking for an example, the number of spaces that you plan to use, and some sort of drawing. It doesn't have to be professionally done, but just so that it gives a sense of what your request is. We do have some instances where folks would like to use the on-street spaces that are serving adjacent businesses or in front of adjacent businesses. And so we are asking you to get support from those adjacent businesses to use the parking spaces. It's not as if those parking spaces belong to the adjacent business, but we are trying to encourage folks to reach out to your neighbors, get some agreement on how to use the public space to everyone's advantage. Even some retailers are finding that it's important to them to have the visibility that comes with having an unobstructed view of their business, or they have pickup that you may not be aware of. So that is something else we encourage. Let's see. There's also the opportunity to have a designated curbside pickup and delivery, and that is available through an application also, but contact information is on the slide.
Great. During the last webinar, we actually had our partners at Virginia ABC online to answer a lot of questions. We don't have them here with us today, but we've provided the basic information here and a link to their instructions for a permit process. What we wanted to make sure we were clear about here is the application process that Carl just explained to create outdoor dining opportunities in Alexandria is separate from the application to the ABC. We are doing our best to help you coordinate but we want to make sure that people understand if you come through the process and you work with Carl and Ann and Katie to set up outdoor dining and parking spaces, sidewalks, etc. If you would like to serve alcohol in those spaces, you do still have to follow the process with the ABC. It's relatively straightforward. It includes almost all of the things that you need to provide to the city. You just need to then pass them on to the agent at the ABC, but you can't leave that piece out. And so I want to make sure that we were being very clear about that. If people have questions here, please feel free to submit them and we'll do our best to answer.
Before we leave that topic, I do want to mention that ABC will be looking to see that you have approval from the city. So even though they are completely distinct reviews, they're linked in a sequence. So you'll want to get your approval from us because ABC will be looking for that.
Great. One other just sort of clarification I'll make is a lot of people and a lot of pictures here that you see are Old Town, but the outdoor dining and the ABC permits are available throughout the city of Alexandria in all neighborhoods of the city. And so make sure that if you are a business in the West End or Carlisle or Delray or Landria, you are just as welcome to submit proposals to facilitate outdoor dining as if you were in Old Town. So next up, we're going to turn it over to Rachel Stradling with the Health Department.
So as we discussed last time, we have introduced a voluntary program to help our businesses not only comply with the requirements of the phased openings, but hopefully to return some of the consumer confidence as we do that phased reopening. So we introduced the ALX Promise program, and I know a lot of you have already signed up to participate. But there's a link on the slide, which I know is going to be sent out later. So if you haven't already signed up, I would encourage you to sign up. We provide you with lots of additional resources, and you also get one of our awesome decals to display in your window too once you fully complete the program. So it's there for you. It's to aid, the safe reopening, but it is voluntary.
Also, we've noted here on this slide that businesses who participate in the ALX Promise program are then featured on the Visit Alexandria website. This is a screenshot of that website, and so for those of you who are members of Visit Alexandria, you fully understand the value of their marketing power. For those of you who are not, you should know that in many Google searches for outdoor dining or restaurants in Alexandria, their page is the first that comes up. So there's a significant value, obviously, from a health perspective in participating in this program, but also from a marketing perspective by being then featured on the Visit Alexandria website. And so with that, we are going to move into the questions, ideas, and suggestions portion. We did have a few questions submitted to us preliminarily, so we'll go through those and would encourage anyone who has questions to submit them in the Q&A or chat function. The first question is actually about farmers markets and whether there were any changes to the farmers markets rules. And I can let Rachel weigh in, but I will point out that there is in the Virginia Forward Phase 2 guidelines, there are very detailed sections for a variety of different industries, and farmers markets are actually called out as a separate section. So if you have not reviewed those, please make sure you do. Anything you want to add, Rachel?
No, I think that covers it. There are discussions obviously ongoing with regards to the city's farmers markets, but currently the guidance is the same as it was for phase 1 with the changes that we made for that.
Great. We had a couple of questions submitted about the availability of public restrooms in the Old Town and waterfront area, and we were able to get an update on that. The public restrooms that are in the same building as Blackwall Hitch will be closed for the foreseeable future. There's a lot of difficulty in being able to provide the 6-foot distancing and gender-specific lines just because of the logistics of that area. And so there is no plan currently to reopen those. The Torpedo Factory will be open on Friday. It will be limited to 100 people in the building, and there will be restrooms available on the inside. There is the Visitor Center on the 200 block of King Street is also opening this week. We're not 100% sure yet about the availability of that public restroom, but the building itself will be opening. And then finally, there was a question, there were porta-johns that were provided on the Strand this weekend. The plan is to keep those in place for 24/7 for the foreseeable future. The city staff, there's a team that I mentioned that's looking at all, kind of in real time how things are changing, and we'll be taking a look at that, and we'll reevaluate it if more is needed moving forward. Anyone else want to add anything about public restrooms? I don't want to steal everyone's shine there. Another question is about when events resume. Should we require guests to wear masks in facilities when they're in sort of the public spaces, in the lobby, in the hallways, or in general in all places? I don't know, Rachel, if you want to weigh in on that. I guess I would say from an events perspective, the 50-person maximum is really, I think, the
Yeah, I would
out.
agree. It's the maximum of 50 people present, and obviously with the good social distancing. With regards to face coverings, the requirement is that when you're inside a building that you have a face covering on unless you are eating or drinking. So depending on what kind of event it was, I would suggest that face coverings would be required.
Rachel, we have a question that a company has registered to participate in the ALX promise, but haven't heard back yet about getting started. So they just wanted to know how long the wait is.
So everyone should have been contacted by now. I'm not sure if my contact information is at the end of the presentation. So please just drop me an email or give me a call and I can double check what's happened to your application. And I can only apologize. We were inundated at the start, but we should have caught up with everybody by now.
I'm going to provide that person with your email address directly. There are a number of questions here about the occupancy inside versus the occupancy outside. And people are looking for clarity on whether the 50% occupancy applies to both. And then also if the total of 50 applies to both. Who would like to tackle that question? Help clarify.
Well, I could take a first stab at it. Somebody can correct me when I'm wrong. But I think that we have always established that the occupancy for the total building is the total occupancy both for outdoor dining and for indoor dining. But nevertheless, I don't know that the governor's orders had clarified that. But my understanding is that would be the total occupancy of both indoor and outdoor dining is what we're looking at. Carl, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Anne, actually, do you want to jump in? Wasn't sure if I heard your voice.
What we had been wrestling with this when we were just dealing with the outdoor dining. And what had been decided is how we were going to treat the outdoor dining areas is to address, the social distancing actually addresses how many can fit within an area. And that was usually far less than what the certificate of occupancy would allow. So we were handling it along those lines. I think it is a good question, though, now that we do have, now that we need to determine or address 50% occupancy indoors, how does that affect, and if it does at all, the outdoors? So
it does seem like there's a lack of clarity. I'm sorry, Anne. There is a lack of clarity in the governor's order, and our guidance to you is maintaining the social distancing is essential. And number one. Number two, no more than 50 indoors with your staff, and those should be the primary parameters that should guide you. We are conscious, and I think there's a comment in chat. There are people that have relatively small indoor businesses and relatively large area potentially for outdoor dining. And so we did understand that if you were able to maintain the distancing requirements and all other safety requirements, that you shouldn't be limited outdoors to what your indoors, your 50% of your indoor capacity.
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, it's really just about egress issues and life safety issues. So the governor's order obviously is way more restrictive. So that makes sense, what Carl and Ann just described to me.
Rachel, do you want to weigh in on the health department's kind of role in overseeing these?
So yeah, I
plans?
will do. From an enforcement perspective, obviously my team has been charged with the enforcement of the social distancing piece. So when we are called out for a complaint or something like that, what we will be looking at is the social distancing aspect, to make sure that there is 6 feet between seated patrons of the different parties. So not necessarily 6 feet between the tables, it has to be 6 feet between the seated guests. And that's what we're going to focus on, because at the end of the day, that's what public health really comes down to, is that 6 feet distance between people.
Great. So there's a question about whether a business is allowed to use non-disposable dishes on the inside of the restaurant.
Yes, they can use non-disposable dishes. Just make sure you wash, rinse, and sanitize like you have done right up and before, obviously, this COVID-19. So continue that good sanitization of dishware.
I'm seeing questions here. More questions are about the capacity. So I think we have answered that as best as possible. Regardless of your maximum capacity indoors, you can still only allow 50 people inside. That is confirmed, yes. And right, people kind of acknowledging that there's certainly a lot more space outside using expanded sidewalk use and parking areas. So I think that those are the questions that we've all gotten through. It looks like I think we've covered all of them. I'll remind everyone here, as we did last time, any of us are available so please reach out to us as you think of more questions or have issues as you enter phase 2. Our goal, and on behalf of the city and all of our related organizations, is to help you get back to normal as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. We know that a lot of these guidelines are coming at you very quickly and with not a whole lot of notice. And so we will do our best to share as much as we know with you as soon as we know it. One final question here is, will the closure of King Street continue through phase 2? And how about phase 3?
So we've believe that it should continue through phase 2. Yes. So the answer is yes to phase 2. And then I think it is a constant evaluation. So we don't have a commitment to phase 3 yet. But it's very much based on how well it's working. Right now, it seems to be working well. There's a good balance between opening it to more outdoor dining and pedestrian way, and so at this point, the indicators are all positive.
Another question is, if there's a party of 30 guests and they are all part of the same group, do the tables need to be socially distanced?
I guess that's a question for me, as I hastily try to find out what the answer is.
And I guess maybe a good, what hopefully some of these restaurants will start to see, right, are groups of weddings, families, etc., that are larger than maybe just 5 to 6 people.
Okay, so the guidance says all parties, whether seated together or across multiple tables, must be limited to 50 patrons or less. And that's as much detail as it gives. So I would say that if the 30 people all come from the same household and the same family, then you would be able to seat them together.
Okay. For a party, a family, or family of 6, how does the social distance work? Can they all sit together?
A family of 6 would be much easier to seat. And yes, they could sit together.
Okay. If the occupancy is 30 and the indoor and outdoor space can space patrons 6 feet apart, can you have 15 inside and 15 outside?
And I think our answer was, it was a little bit of equivocating a bit because the guidance isn't super clear. But we were saying that it's acceptable because you're maintaining the distancing requirements.
Great. All right, well, I think that was our last spurt of questions. Again, reach out to any of us for additional clarification, and don't hesitate as you enter into phase 2 this weekend. If there are things that you realize or have questions about, please reach out to us so that we can help you continue to be flexible and safely reopen. So thank you all for coming today, and good luck moving into phase 2.